Welcome everybody to Honey Bee's Symposia series, the first in our 2026 year. We're in our fourth year, so bravo that you guys keep supporting us and evidently want more content. And here we are supplying you with a whole new year of four interesting programs. My name is Steve Rogenstein. I'm your host today and Honey Bee's project director. And we are going to hear today about a project that we worked on for a number of years, which in the end is a source of pride and accomplishment. With a team of 14 bee scientists, we reassessed the IUCN Red List status of wild Apis mellifera in Europe, and that resulted in a new classification, which we'll talk about today. We've assembled some of the players in that work who will provide context as to what is IUCN, its red list for threatened species, the process, challenges, and rationale of the reassessment, as well as during the panel discussion, what some implications and possible next steps might be. To start, I'll briefly introduce Honey Bee Watch for anyone who's new. We're an international coalition tasked with better understanding the biological, behavioral, and environmental factors that bolster survival among free-living honeybees. And by free living, we mean bees that have chosen where they want to live, whether that be in trees, in log hives, buildings, holes in the ground, wherever. And generally, they're living with very little to no human intervention. So our aim with Honey Bee Watch is to develop nature-based solutions to lower the mortality rates of managed colonies, to increase beekeeping sustainability, and most importantly, and ultimately, to protect the threatened wild populations around the world. We've been around for 6 years, and in that time, with the help of our research partners and participating citizen scientists, we have identified more than 2,000 nest sites on 5 continents, many of which are viewable in our mapping platform. Today, you're going to hear about our work with IUCN, which has been something that we've been working on for quite some time. We're also part of a consortium called FreeBee that was awarded a €1 million grant from Biodiversity Plus through the European Commission. And that money is to support extensive study for 3 years of free-living colonies, which I might refer to as FLCs in the future, so just mind that. And we're going to be doing that research, we are doing that research in France, Ireland, Poland, Portugal, and Sweden. We talked about this last year in March of 2025, and if you're curious about that, you can watch the video, or you can learn more about the study and even participate as a citizen scientist on the website. So that is Honey Bee Watch in a nutshell. What I'd like to do is just quickly present a brief introduction to the Symposia series in general. As I said, we're in our 4th year. Our primary goal was to bring this free-living honeybee community together so that our experts, our guests, could meet one another and exchange their expertise and their knowledge, for you to get exposed to their work, for you to connect and interact. Sometimes these chats are very lively, so we encourage you to interact with one another. And of course, to explore relevant and challenging topics. And so that brings us to today's program, our first symposium of the year, that's titled IUCN Red List, Wild Honeybees Labeled Endangered in EU. As you'll hear, Honey Bee Watch pulled together 14 bee scientists to reassess the red list status of wild Apis mellifera in Europe. Previously, they had been categorized as data deficient in 2014. Back then, there wasn't much data that had been collected on the FLCs. However, in these intervening years, many independent studies have located them, started monitoring them, and have learned much more about them. So we saw an opportunity to bring these folks together, along with citizen scientists, to collect more data, pool our resources, and work together for their eventual protection around the world. And one early kind of dream of Honey Bee Watch was to update this data deficient status, which we did in October and which you'll hear more about right now. So our next guest is Arrigo Moro. If you've attended one of our past symposia or otherwise been connected to Honey Bee Watch, you know him. He's our science director and was the lead of this IUCN Task Force. Just to introduce him, he's the second generation professional beekeeper, has a veterinarian degree, doctorate rather, got his PhD at the University of Bern, where he was studying FLC's surviving varroa through natural selection. He recently completed his postdoc at University of Galway, and is now working as a researcher at the National Reference Center for Beekeeping and Honeybee Health in Italy. So he will contextualize the process and challenges and reasoning behind the team's reassessment.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much for the generous introduction, I would say. Yes, so the idea here with this presentation is to give you a bit of an overview of what we did within the Honeybee team regarding this project, this major project on the Red List of bees and the update of the assessment. As Denis said, there was the one of the main that came out was the definition of the assessment of the species as data deficient at the pan-European level, but the EU 27 level, so at the level of the 27 European countries, European Union countries, the species has been labeled as endangered. I'm just gonna tell you a bit how we got to that point. A bit of history in a way, or more a bit about the details of what the situation was before this reassessment. The previous assessment of the species, or at least of the populations, because the assessment referred to wild honeybees populations. In 2014, wild apis mellifera were considered as data deficient, mostly for the lack of data. There was a lack of research done at the moment, probably motivated by the fact that most of the research, honeybee research, was focused on solving the honeybee managed honeybee colony losses, the problem that just emerged around the end of the first 10 years of the 2000s. So probably most of the focus was on that, and there was not much research done on their wild counterpart, unfortunately. Though a big consideration need to be done on the perspective with which this assessment was conducted in a way. And it was what I'm referring to was actually the definition that was used to define, to describe what a wild population is within the honeybee species. So there was a consideration that there was the capacity to distinguish at the time the genetic difference between managed colonies and wild colonies. I'll not go much into the details here because I'm sure that Benjamin after me will talk about more about the differentiation between these two particular populations. But what I can say is that at the time, this particular definition was not that useful. In fact, there is no genetic difference or marked or significant difference that distinguish bees living in the wild and bees living in boxes in a way. They are basically the same species. So it was very difficult to define that. But in a way, what was concluded in 2014 was that the species was data deficient. Now, the wild population status was data deficient. Now, the idea of solving this particular problem or updating the status, our initiative was born in a way. Honeybee Watch was basically founded around this problem. We gathered in at the first time we met in Puławy during a COLOS meeting or the Survivors Task Force meeting. And the idea was actually to come together and try to solve this issue of data and not available for wild honeybees. And so we founded informally the Honeybee Watch group. And after that, we got in contact almost immediately with IUCN. And we shared contact with David Allen working in IUCN, and he who actually follows the assessment on the apis mellifera side for the latest years. And basically, we asked them ways for how we can contribute as a group of expert researchers to this particular problem. And we got to understand that the first way to start was actually gathering data on the distribution of colonies living in the wild in Europe. So that's how we basically started our first step in developing the platform that you probably know already. It was developed thanks to the help of the GIS collective people, so a group based in Germany of open source developers. At the moment, it is under construction, as Steve said, because we are renovating it. So hopefully in April we're gonna have a final, more stable version. So in basically we got to know about this project of reassessment of the species of all the wild species in Europe during a conference, of ERB conference in Belgrade, because we were recruited in a way by Denis, Mir at the time, and Denis, because we got to know of their particular project that Denis just described here. And we teamed up with them and we started gathering data. So at the beginning, what we were told is that by IUCN was that basically the report was supposed to be submitted the middle of 2023. So we started asking people around, get in contact with different organizations that we know of that were involved in the study of free living colonies, whether for research purposes or whether they were organizations that were independent from university or research institutions. And then we started also contacting previous assessors and put together a team of 40, of new assessors. So we came up then with a team of 14 assessors, and most of which are actually present here. So thank you guys for showing up also at this event. And a point then was to describe, in a way, to describe what we were able to achieve. The first part is actually reviewing the literature that was produced since 2014 and integrating that into a new report. But more importantly, and that's where a big thank you, I think, has to be said, is actually related to the collaboration and the help from different institutions, different organizations that basically through their help we were able to collect almost 1,700 free living colonies nests across 15 countries. And here's a quick list. It's quite a lot of partners, so we're very happy to have to being able to put this many people into the report and acknowledge them, especially because as Denis just showed, it's very important to have an understanding of the distribution of a species living in the wild throughout Europe and as wide as possible. So thank you for those who actually helped us. So we started compiling this data. We started compiling this different literature, etc. But we understood that there was the necessity actually to reformat things or start from a new perspective, because the previous definition of what constitutes a wild population of honeybees was actually not useful. It was not following IUCN criteria. So we basically started from scratch, defining in a way our research unit, if you want to say in that way, and we started coining the term of free living colonies. I mean, this term was already used in research in previous papers before, but we, in a way, you can say that we formalize it as a group in that particular report. And we started defining colonies living in the wild we started defining our, let's say, the unit or the particular subject of the report and that we were building up as free living colonies. So describing colonies by their nesting habits rather than starting from defining them whether they were wild or managed. And that actually gave us a possibility of developing a better perspective. So we define free living colonies are colonies that nest in cavities that they choose and that are actually unmanaged by humans. And from that, then we were able to define what one population is, meaning is a group that is self-sustaining, so it can able to maintain itself. without the need actually of help from other groups, other population. And to this, I'm sure Benjamin will go much into the details, in better details, and describing the process here. Now, so what we were able to achieve was first of all, together from that data, from the data that we gathered, and I'm gonna tell you a bit more about the data that we collected. We arrived to an assessment, a final assessment, defining the wild honeybee population as being endangered within the territory of the 27 countries members of the EU. But the population, the wild population remain data deficient at the pan-European level. So why how were we able to label wild honeybee populations in the EU 27 country as endangered? We basically use the criteria by IUCN. You can basically, the way in which a category is assigned to a particular species, to a particular wild population, depends on the criteria that basically IUCN lists. We use the criteria A, which refer to population size reduction. And here you see the different boxes detailing the particular also sub-criteria that we use. We arrived at this of fulfilling, let's say, this criteria by compiling the data on sighting of free living colonies from the different countries. So the map that I just showed you, listing the different evidence on the multiple threats affecting the survival of honeybees in the wild. This was mostly done basically by compiling also research coming from managed honeybees. So what we know make the life of bees difficult in the wild. And the density estimation, we knew that in Europe bees are not doing that well, let's say. They're not that common. And then, but more importantly, the data on self-sustainability of wild populations. Unfortunately, though, it's a bit news, this one, but even though we did all that work, wild honeybees were at the end excluded from the final red list. And I'm just gonna cite here the reason why. Mainly because the red list or the whole project was mostly focused at the species level, while what we know about the species itself in while Western honeybees in Europe, they're not doing that bad because they are basically helped by humans. So the species level, the species is not doing bad. It's actually the population that are not that in a good shape, say they are endangered. So probably I'm close to my end time here. So what's next? And probably we're gonna discuss a bit this point during the panel discussion. Well, we should continue research and foster the research and the collection of data into this re-emerging field, especially I would say, focusing on the different organizations that already have boots on the ground in a way in this particular field, and they are doing already quite a lot of research. There can be the possibility of starting national red list assessment. Maybe Denis, correct me if I'm wrong here, but after we basically unlock the possibility of EU level assessment, you can do also the national one. So different countries can organize themselves. We also cited the let's say the influence of beekeeping over the protection of wild bees, wild honeybees, and it's important also to consider them in the future plans for protection of wild honeybee species, but wild honeybee population, sorry. But more importantly, also the consequences of the current discussion that basically pitting honeybees against wild bees in general. So it's a very hot topic at the moment, and I thought that it's important also to consider that. And with that, I finish. Sorry if I just went over my time, Steve.
You are within a good
Am
limit,
I?
so thank
Oh
you.
my God,
I
thank you.
mean, to summarize 3 years of hard work
Yeah.
in like 13 minutes, I don't expect you to fit it all in. So thank you, Arrigo, for that presentation about the work that we did.